Mother's Day morning in the Whitaker household was always quiet and elegant, a contrast to the chaos the rest of the world celebrated with. Helen Whitaker stood at the kitchen window, sunlight spilling across the marble countertops, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the subtle perfume of lilacs from the garden. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find a young florist holding a single long-stemmed rose in a crystal vase, tied with a burgundy ribbon. The card read, "To my one and only, forever yours, D." Helen's smile was soft, almost knowing. For 26 years, Daniel had never missed a Mother's Day. It was their unspoken vow, their secret ritual. One rose, one promise. But 18 miles away, in a modest seaside town, Celeste Monroe opened her own front door to receive the exact same rose. Same vase. Same ribbon. Same handwriting. Same words. She stared at it in stunned silence. For her, the rose was more than tradition. It was Daniel's silent reassurance that what they had was real. Their love had always lived in the margins. Between his business trips, inside voicemails deleted too quickly, and shadows she'd been content to inhabit. Until now. The mix-up might have been brushed off, had Helen's eldest daughter, Madeline, not posted a photo of the rose on Instagram with the caption, 26 years, one rose. Every year. Dad still got it. Within the hour, Celeste's teenage son, Jordan, saw the post and recoiled. "Mom, why does that woman have your rose?" Celeste's fingers trembled as she picked up her phone. She dialed Daniel's number. Voicemail. Again and again. Back at the Whitaker home, Helen was pouring tea when Madeline burst into the room, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Mom, who is this woman, and why is she holding your rose?" Helen blinked, confused, as she took the phone from her daughter's hand. There was the image. Celeste, holding her own identical rose, her expression unreadable, but her caption made Helen's blood run cold. "To my one and only, forever yours, D." The silence in the room grew heavy. Helen's grip tightened on the vase. By nightfall, the families had gone from strangers to adversaries. The air buzzed with denial, confusion, and disbelief. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Daniel Whitaker's phone was still off. The next morning, the Whitakers' breakfast table sat untouched. The clatter of silverware and the usual Sunday laughter were replaced with a tense, aching quiet. Helen sat at the head of the table, staring at her phone, scrolling through photos and articles that had already begun to surface online. Her husband's name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. Across town, Celeste Monroe sat on her living room couch, cradling a worn leather box in her lap. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a delicate platinum ring with an engraving inside. "My always DW." She had never needed proof of their marriage before. Daniel had always made her feel like his whole world, even if it was a world lived in pieces. But now, with everyone calling her a liar, she needed the receipts. She pulled out the marriage certificate, its edges frayed, the date on it a knife to Helen's heart once it was delivered, March 12, 1999. Just 1 year after Helen gave birth to their third child. By noon, Celeste arrived, uninvited, at the Whitaker residence. She didn't knock. She stood on the front lawn, holding the certificate like a weapon, her voice calm but icy. "You've been living in a fairy tale, Helen. But I was never the villain. I was the wife." Helen stepped onto the porch, her children behind her like a wall of confused witnesses. Her eyes locked on the document, her breath catching as she read the familiar loop of Daniel's signature. There was no mistaking it, no denying it. "My husband would never," Helen began, but even she didn't believe it. Her voice faltered. "He told me you were over," Celeste said, voice cracking. "He said he was staying for the kids. That he just needed more time." "Time?" Helen's voice rose. "Time for what? A secret second life? A whole other child?" That's when Celeste said it. "Jordan is your children's brother. He's Daniel's son. And I have school records, birthday cards, and 15 years of photographs to prove it." Madeline, standing at her mother's side, took a step back. Her heart raced. "Jordan? The boy she just messaged? The one who commented on her post?" Celeste's eyes scanned the stunned faces in front of her. None of you knew. He lied to all of us." The weight of betrayal settled like fog. What had once been a charming family tradition, one rose, every year, was now the calling card of a con man. Helen clutched the ring around her finger as if it might burn her. But the real fire had only just begun. And Daniel? Still nowhere to be found. By the third day, the media circus had moved in like vultures, circling a wounded animal. Camera crews camped outside both homes. Headlines blared, "Double life dad? Mother's Day scandal explodes." But amid the noise, one truth became deafening. Daniel Whitaker had vanished. Helen had spent the night pacing the bedroom they once shared, dialing every contact in his phone, clients, colleagues, golf buddies, only to find his number suddenly disconnected. His office downtown, once filled with sleek furniture and curated family photos, was now eerily stripped bare. Not a file, not a single drawer left behind, as if he'd never existed. Meanwhile, Celeste drove to the lodge where Daniel had often stayed during his business trips. The front desk clerk blinked at the photo she showed him. "Yeah, he left 2 days ago," the clerk said slowly, "but he wasn't alone." He tapped a few keys and turned the screen toward her. The grainy footage showed Daniel walking briskly through the lobby, baseball cap low over his eyes. A woman followed close behind him, face turned away from the camera, but with hair unmistakably not Helen's and not Celeste's either. Celeste's breath caught. "Who is she?" The clerk shrugged. "Checked in under Ms. I. Green, paid cash." Back in the Whitaker home, Helen stared blankly at the GPS tracker her son Ben had secretly installed in Daniel's car last year, suspecting him of having an affair but never daring to prove it. The last ping was 2 nights ago, a rest stop off Highway 31, then nothing. The police were finally called, but their tone was clipped. "There's no sign of foul play. If Mr. Whitaker left of his own accord, there's little we can do." "But people don't just disappear," Helen snapped. "Sometimes," the officer said gently, "they want to." Tensions boiled over when Celeste stormed into the Whitaker home unannounced, holding a printed screenshot of the surveillance photo. "Recognize her?" she demanded. "Because I don't." And he left with her. Helen, pale but composed, stared at the image, her jaw clenched. "I don't know who she is, but I will." And just like that, the wives became unwilling allies. 2 women chasing the same ghost, unraveling the same lie. But as the truth began to surface, they didn't yet realize that Daniel's vanishing act was only the opening move in a much darker game. The more they searched, the less they recognized him. After days of dead ends, it was Daniel's son Ben, the quiet, tech-savvy middle child, who cracked open the first door to the truth. In the attic of the Whitaker home, behind dusty holiday boxes and beneath a false bottom in an old trunk, Ben discovered a locked briefcase. Helen's hands shook as she opened it with Daniel's anniversary date. Inside, ledgers, notebooks, and banking documents, some dating back 20 years. But it wasn't the money that struck first. It was the names. 2 sets of business cards, 2 tax IDs, 2 email addresses, Daniel Whitaker and David Wallace. "I thought Dad was an insurance broker," Ben whispered. "So did I," Helen replied, her voice hollow. Celeste, too, was unraveling a financial maze of her own. With Jordan's help, she tracked down a P.O. box Daniel used for years in a nearby city. Inside was a cache of receipts, hotel stays, wire transfers, even birthday gifts for someone listed only as I. Green. But more disturbing were the bank statements. Multiple accounts under aliases, accounts in Switzerland, Cayman Islands, even Hong Kong. Some of the deposits were small. Others, like the one dated the week before his disappearance, were enormous. 1 deposit, 1 note. Final transfer. All clean. Helen, poring through the ledgers, noticed something odd. There were gaps, months of activity missing, as if someone had gone through and removed entire chapters. And then there was a post-it stuck to the last page. "Don't trust what you think you know." "What was he into?" Madeline asked, staring at the foreign wire transfers. Ben's voice was quiet. "This isn't just infidelity. It's fraud, maybe worse." Meanwhile, Celeste visited the bank listed on one of Daniel's statements, pretending to be his wife. The manager hesitated, then pulled her aside. "He told us to expect you," the woman said carefully. "But not you specifically, just one of them." She handed over a sealed envelope addressed in Daniel's handwriting. Inside were a set of keys, a code to a safe deposit box, and a note. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry. But some things had to stay hidden for a reason. Look closer, Celeste. You were never the only secret I kept." With each discovery, it became terrifyingly clear. Daniel Whitaker hadn't just built a double life. He'd built a fortress of lies, designed to fall only after he vanished. But buried somewhere in those ledgers, hidden between the aliases and the offshore accounts, was something neither family expected: a payment made to a private maternity clinic and a name they didn't recognize. And it was dated before any of the children were born. Helen Whitaker had always been the picture of poise: PTA president, charity organizer, the woman who hosted the annual Mother's Day brunch so flawlessly that even the cutlery seemed intimidated. But behind the manicured lawn and perfectly arranged tulips, something darker had long been buried. While Celeste chased paper trails and surveillance footage, Helen turned inward, into her home, into her past. It began with the diary, discovered by her daughter Madeline in a forgotten cedar chest in the guest room. The entries began innocuously: lists, recipes, sweet moments with the kids. But around the 5th page, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew tighter, the words sharper. "He's back again, with more excuses. I should ask where he goes. But what if I already know? She called me. Or someone did. Didn't say a word, just breathing. I could hear her crying. I told him, if she comes near the children, I'll expose everything." Helen was silent as Madeline read those lines aloud. Then she took the diary, pressed it to her chest, and left the room. Later that night, over a glass of wine she barely sipped, Helen confessed, "There was a moment, a long time ago, when I met someone in a coffee shop. A woman. She said her name was Celeste. She didn't know I was me. But I knew who she was." She paused. "I said nothing. I let her walk out." Madeline blinked. "You knew?" "I suspected," Helen corrected. "I couldn't prove it. And if I was wrong, I'd look insane. But more than anything," she looked up, eyes shining with something between shame and defiance, "I didn't want to lose what I had, even if it meant living with half a man." Celeste, meanwhile, uncovered her own damning truth. She found a photo tucked inside one of Daniel's old books, marked with an address written in her own handwriting. The image showed Helen, young, confident, radiant, standing in front of a house Celeste had once visited. A house she had knocked on, years ago, when Daniel had vanished on a business trip. "He said it belonged to a client," Celeste whispered. "He swore I was being paranoid." Now the photo screamed otherwise. The truth settled between them like ash. Helen had known, maybe not everything, but enough, and said nothing. Whether from fear, pride, or calculation, no one could say. And yet even that was not the most haunting part. Because inside the same cedar chest where the diary had been hidden, Madeline found something else: a woman's bracelet, silver, delicate, etched with the name Isabel, stuffed deep into a velvet pouch. Helen stared at it as if seeing a ghost. "That's not mine," she said faintly, but it was found in her home, and it meant someone else had been there. The DNA test results arrived in a plain, unassuming envelope, but the moment it landed on the Whitaker kitchen table, everything in the room seemed to pause. Even the birds outside, chirping through the open window, seemed to stop mid-song. Helen stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity, her hands frozen around the edges. The implications of the test haunted her. Could she face whatever truth it would reveal? The test had been Helen's idea, suggested after a conversation with Ben that sent a cold shiver down her spine. Ben had been skeptical about a lot of things, about his father's duplicity, about the years of secrets. But this wasn't something he could ignore. "Mom, we need to know," he'd said. "If Daniel hid a whole other family, what else is he hiding? Who are we really?" The test, sent to a private lab under strict confidentiality, had been simple enough: a cheek swab. But now, as Helen sliced the envelope open, she realized that the answers within were anything but simple. The results were unequivocal. Helen's oldest daughter, Lila, was not biologically hers. A chill ran through Helen as her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Lila had always been her child, her firstborn, the girl who had inherited her smile, her stubbornness, her quick wit. To see that a scientific test could rob her of that truth was almost impossible to comprehend. Helen turned to look at her daughter, whose face had drained of color as soon as she saw the result. Lila, who had always been the perfect child, the one who could do no wrong, wasn't really hers. Lila's voice was a mere whisper. "Who am I, Mom?" Helen's throat tightened. I don't know what this means." "I'm adopted?" Lila's voice broke, trembling like fragile glass. She had always known she didn't quite fit in with the Whitaker family. Was it because she wasn't one of them? Helen shook her head, clinging to the denial. No. I would have known. But then the truth settled in, like ice. If Lila wasn't hers, then who was she? The question gnawed at her like a festering wound. Who was her real mother? And why had Daniel kept this secret for so long? The more Helen thought about it, the more certain she became that this couldn't have been a mistake. Lila had been born just months before Daniel's first affair with Celeste, and the timing of her pregnancy had never fully lined up with Daniel's business trips. Was this how Daniel had managed to keep both families hidden for so long? Did he take a child, his own flesh and blood, from someone else? And why? Was Lila swapped at birth? Or was there a deeper conspiracy at play? Could Isabel, the mysterious woman tied to the bracelet, have been involved? Across town, Celeste felt a stab of guilt for everything that had unfolded. She had a nagging suspicion she was connected to this twisted puzzle. Her son, Jordan, had been the one to first suggest they test Lila, curious about how everything fit together. He had recognized the similarities between Lila and someone he'd never met, Isabel. Back at the Whitaker house, the confrontation began. Helen called for a family meeting, and the atmosphere was charged with uncertainty and dread. "You've always felt different, haven't you, Lila?" Helen asked, her voice strained. "But I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." Lila's eyes were wide, her voice shaking as she tried to comprehend. I thought you loved me, that you were my real mom." "I do love you," Helen said, her voice breaking. "I've always loved you. You are my daughter. But this changes everything." The room grew quiet as Lila absorbed the devastating truth. The floor beneath her feet seemed to give way. Meanwhile, Madeline, silent until now, couldn't hold back any longer. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears. "How could Dad do this?" she whispered. "How could he lie about everything?" Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was Ben, holding something in his hand. Another photograph. One they hadn't seen before. He dropped it on the table. It was an image of a newborn Lila wrapped in a blanket. The name on the birth certificate next to it wasn't Whitaker. It was a name no one in the room recognized, Isabel Green. And in that instant, the room fell into complete silence. The discovery of this name, Isabel Green, was the last piece of a puzzle that was beginning to crack open. What had Daniel been hiding? What twisted game had he played? As Helen looked down at the photograph, her stomach dropped. Everything she knew about herself, about her family, was starting to shatter. The real truth was coming to light, and with it, the ghost of Isabel, the woman whose name had been buried in the dark corners of their lives. The discovery of Lila's true parentage had ripped the Whitaker family apart, but it was the letter, the torn letter, that finally unraveled everything. It had been Helen's youngest daughter, Emma, who found it. Late one night, while rummaging through a drawer in the old china cabinet, she came across a crumpled envelope sealed with wax, its edges worn, as though it had been opened and closed a dozen times. It was tucked beneath a stack of recipes, its name written in the most delicate handwriting Emma had ever seen. To my dearest Helen, the handwriting was unmistakably familiar. It was Daniel's. The note had been torn in half, the second page missing. What remained were the words that seemed to echo from a place long buried. "You are my everything, and yet I cannot tell you the truth. I cannot burden you with the weight of what I've done. But please, When you find this, when you learn what I've kept from you, know that it was always because I loved you, even if I could never show you the truth in the light." Emma, sensing the gravity of what she had found, didn't dare show her mother just yet. She wasn't ready to break the fragile calm in the house. Instead, she brought it to Ben, the only one who seemed to grasp the enormity of the situation. Ben's breath caught when he read the note. "This letter was written after the affair with Celeste, wasn't it?" Emma nodded slowly. "It has to be." They pored over the fragile edges, and though part of the second page was missing, the rest spoke volumes. There were only a few lines that hinted at something much darker. The mention of someone named Isabel seemed out of place, and the letter's tone shifted dramatically. "I should have told you sooner. I have been with her, and she has borne my child. But you must understand, Helen, I never wanted this to happen. The woman you're about to meet, her name is Isabel. She has always been my truest love." Ben froze at the mention of Isabel's name. It's her, Isabel. She was the one. The puzzle pieces clicked together for him. This wasn't just an affair. It was something far more complicated. Daniel wasn't just being unfaithful. He had fallen in love with someone else, someone he had kept hidden from the family for years. Emma glanced at him, her face pale. "There's something else. I found this tucked behind the note." She pulled out an old photograph, its edges curling with age. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. There was Daniel, much younger, standing next to a woman whose face was partially obscured by shadows. But what stood out was the child in her arms. A baby that Emma realized, looking closer, was very likely Lila. She felt a chill settle over her. Isabel was holding Lila before she was taken to the Whitaker house? Emma's voice wavered. "Before," Ben confirmed, his face now grim. Daniel didn't just keep secrets, he erased the truth, erased her history. But what was most disturbing was the next part of the letter. The final words, scrawled in haste, almost as if Daniel had feared being caught. "I know you will never forgive me, and I have accepted that, but I can never take back what I've done. The baby you will see, she is mine. You'll know her by the name on her birth certificate. It's not Whitaker. It's Green." It was the final confirmation, the last horrifying detail. Daniel had abandoned not just his wife, but his own child. Meanwhile, across town, Celeste, who had been combing through Daniel's abandoned office for any further clues, stumbled upon a similar locked drawer. The key was conveniently lying on the desk beside it, as though Daniel had known that the truth was bound to surface. Inside, she found a second torn letter, this one addressed to her. The contents were far more personal, revealing Daniel's internal conflict. He had once promised Celeste that he would divorce Helen. Yet, as the years went by, he never did. He simply vanished for days, for weeks, making empty promises to return, but never truly committing. "I love you, Celeste. But Helen is my wife. She is the mother of my children. And as much as I wish I could give you what you need, I can't. I am trapped by the family I built. Even if my heart belongs to you, I'll never be able to choose." Celeste's fingers trembled as she read the words, realizing just how deeply she had been lied to. She had been a part of Daniel's world, but never truly a part of his heart. Now, with both families reeling from the revelation of Lila's true parentage, the ghost of Isabel Green seemed to be the thread that wove all the secrets together. Her name, hidden, forgotten, was now the key to unlocking everything. Helen, sitting alone in her room that night, couldn't escape the overwhelming weight of the truth. The letter from Daniel lay open in front of her, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, deep, wrenching sobs for the family she had lost, for the man who had never truly been hers. The family had barely begun to process the shocking discovery of Lila's true parentage when the impossible happened. Daniel Whitaker, the man who had been missing for weeks, presumed dead, kidnapped, or hiding, walked into the Whitaker family home, but he wasn't alone. Standing at his side was a woman whose presence sent a cold shiver down everyone's spine. Isabel Green, the third woman, was here, in the flesh. It was a moment that felt like a bad dream, one that none of them were sure they could wake from. Helen had been sitting alone in the kitchen, clutching the letter she had found earlier, when she heard the front door open. Her heart stopped for a beat. There was no way it could be him. She had already resigned herself to the idea that Daniel would never come back. Yet when she heard his voice, familiar and steady, a surge of conflicting emotions erupted in her chest. "Helen," Daniel's voice echoed through the hallway, and the door to the living room opened with an almost cruel finality. "We need to talk." Helen's breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, heart racing, mind swirling with all the things she wanted to say. Rage, betrayal, confusion, but none of them seemed to make it past her lips. All she could do was stare at him as he walked into the room. He was the same as he had always been, yet everything about him had changed. The charming smile was gone. The eyes that once held the promise of a future now appeared weary, tired, hollow. Behind him stood Isabel, a woman in her mid-30s with striking features, dark hair, green eyes, a quiet intensity. She was dressed in a simple, flowing dress, a contrast to the sleek, polished style of the Whittaker women. Yet there was something in the way she stood, poised and confident, that made it impossible to look away. Helen felt her chest tighten. This was her. Isabel's gaze met hers, and for a long moment it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. She was the ghost Daniel had hidden away, the third piece of the puzzle that had shattered their lives. And now she was standing there, as if she belonged. "What is this?" Helen asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "You're really here after everything?" Isabel gave a tight smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not here to cause more trouble. I'm just here to tell the truth, to help you understand." Daniel stepped forward, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Helen, you need to understand. This is my fault, but I've never meant for you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you." But the damage had already been done. Every word out of his mouth only felt like salt in an open wound. Ben and Madeline, who had been sitting in the adjoining room, rushed in. Their eyes flicked from Daniel to Isabel, their faces a reflection of the shock and disbelief that Helen herself was struggling to contain. Lila, who had been hiding upstairs after the revelation of her parentage, descended slowly, her steps tentative. She had to see this with her own eyes, the woman who had somehow been connected to her existence in a way she hadn't yet fully understood. Isabel glanced at her, a shadow crossing her face. For a brief moment, Lila thought she saw something close to recognition in the woman's eyes, something that made her feel like she was staring into a mirror of a life she could never reclaim. "Isabel," Daniel said softly, his voice breaking the heavy silence, Tell them what we were to each other, the truth." Isabel took a deep breath and stepped forward, her posture unwavering. "I'm the woman Daniel left behind, the one he loved before everything else." Her voice was smooth, yet there was an undercurrent of sadness that hinted at the decades of pain behind her words. "We were never married, at least not legally. But we were more than just lovers. I was the one who truly knew him." Helen's face contorted in confusion and fury. "More than just lovers? You were nothing but an affair to him. He never told me about you, never said a word." "He couldn't," Isabel responded calmly, her gaze unwavering. "Not because he didn't love you, but because he couldn't stand the thought of losing everything he had. He built a family with you, Helen, and he couldn't walk away from that, but he couldn't stop loving me either." There it was, the painful truth, the confession that had been buried deep beneath layers of lies and secrecy. Daniel had loved them both, and his attempt to split his heart in two had led to the destruction of all three lives. "Why now?" Ben demanded, his voice sharp. "After everything, why are you here? Why bring this chaos into our lives?" "I didn't want this," Isabel replied, her voice laced with quiet sorrow. "But Daniel came to me months ago. He told me everything. About his marriage, about his children, and about the lies he'd been living. And when he disappeared, I knew he couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't stay hidden from you all. I had to come forward, to give you the truth." Helen turned away, pressing her hands to her temples. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of weeks, and now, standing before her was a woman who was as much a part of Daniel's life as she was, perhaps more so. And in her hands, she held the missing pieces of a puzzle that would never quite fit together. Then, with quiet resolve, Daniel spoke again. "There's one more thing you need to know." Helen's heart stopped, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "What is it?" "It's about Lila," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Isabel, she's her mother." The room fell completely silent. The silence that followed Daniel's final words was suffocating. Lila, standing at the foot of the stairs, looked like a ghost of herself, wide-eyed, pale, trembling. Helen had dropped to the nearest chair as if her legs no longer worked, then stared blankly ahead, jaw clenched, while Madeline paced furiously like a trapped animal. Isabel stood motionless, her hands folded in front of her, tears brimming but unshed, and Daniel, well, he looked broken. But it was Lila who finally broke the silence. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear, eerily calm. "I already knew." Helen's head jerked up. "What?" "I knew. About her." "About everything," Lila said, nodding toward Isabel. "I've known for years, and I made sure the truth came out. My way." The room turned to ice. Isabel's lips parted in disbelief. "Lila, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Lila continued, stepping into the center of the room, "that none of this, none of the chaos, none of the perfectly timed unraveling, was an accident." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were emails, receipts, forged delivery forms, old photographs, and, most damningly, 2 letters addressed in Daniel's handwriting but never sent. She tossed the folder onto the coffee table, and the contents spilled like confetti from a cursed celebration. "I paid off the florist," Lila said, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. "I made sure those identical roses were delivered to both houses. I knew it would raise questions." Helen's breath caught. "You started this?" "I accelerated it," Lila clarified. "Dad was always going to slip up eventually. I just made sure the fall was dramatic enough to get your attention." Daniel looked sick. "Why? Why would you do this?" Lila turned to Isabel, her gaze flickering with emotion. Anger, love, longing. "Because she deserved better, and so did I." Everyone stared at her. She went on. "Growing up, I never felt like I belonged. You always said I was spirited, difficult." I heard whispers. "I saw how you all looked at me when I didn't quite fit the mold. And when I was 15, I found the letter in your drawer, Mom. The one torn in half." Helen blinked, lips parting. I pieced it together, realized Daniel, my father, had written to someone else, someone named Isabel. I found her. I visited her. I looked into her eyes, and I knew she was my mother. Isabel covered her mouth, trembling. "You never told me who you were." "I wanted to, but I wasn't ready. And I didn't want to come back into her life quietly," Lila said. "Not after being left behind like a dirty little secret. So I spent the last few years gathering every document, every lie. I traced the fake names, the duplicate bank accounts, the forged signatures. I paid a friend to impersonate a process server and gather records from Daniel's law firm." Ben stepped forward, stunned. "You forged documents?" Lila didn't flinch. "Only the ones that needed forging. The truth was always there. I just helped push it into the light." Daniel stared at his daughter, his lies reflected in her like a cracked mirror. "You manipulated your own family." "No," Lila snapped. "You manipulated all of us. You played house with 3 different women, built 2 lives, maybe 3. You cheated, lied, disappeared. I just finished what you started." A tear slipped down Isabel's cheek. "You could have told me. I would have taken you in." "I didn't want pity. I wanted justice." Helen stood up slowly, the weight of every betrayal pressing down on her. She looked at Lila, her daughter, but now someone she wasn't sure she ever truly knew. "You let us tear each other apart," Helen whispered. "You used us." "I wanted the truth," Lila said simply. "And now, you have it." The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to scream, cry, collapse, but no one did. Everyone just stood there, paralyzed by the magnitude of what Lila had confessed. Daniel turned away and sank into the armchair, silent. And in the silence, Lila added one last dagger. "I didn't do this out of hate," she said. "I did it because I loved her, because I spent my life being denied her. And because you made a choice, Daniel, to bury the past like it wouldn't rise again. She looked to Isabel. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I'm here now. And no one's going to bury me again. 1 year later, the Whitaker house, once full of laughter, Sunday roasts, and suburban calm, now stood quieter. The walls no longer echoed with secrets. They simply remembered them. Helen sat at the kitchen table, gazing out the window as the spring sunlight dappled the lawn. It was Mother's Day again, but nothing felt like it used to. No familiar buzz of Daniel's laughter, no perfume of roses waiting on the doorstep. Just silence, until, ding-dong, the doorbell. Helen hesitated, heart pounding. Her hand trembled as she opened the door. There, lying on the welcome mat, was a single red rose in a glass tube. No card, no note, just the flower. Across town, Celeste received the same delivery. She stood barefoot on her porch in a bathrobe, staring at the rose in disbelief. Her grown son, Eli, hovered nearby, unsure whether to bring it inside or throw it into the street. Celeste didn't speak. She just whispered, "He's still playing games." And at a third location, Lila, now living in a small coastal town with Isabel, the woman she now openly called Mom, opened her own front door to find a rose, too. But unlike the others, hers included something else. A small envelope. Tucked inside was a photograph. Faded, torn at the edges, but unmistakably powerful. In it stood 3 women, Helen, Celeste, and Isabel, much younger, their arms loosely around each other in what seemed like an uneasy truce. Between them stood a little girl, perhaps 3 years old. Her face was turned toward the camera, a wide, innocent smile on her lips. But the girl wasn't Lila, and no one in any of the families could identify her. Lila stared at the photograph, a chill crawling up her spine. "What is this?" Isabel asked, leaning over her shoulder. "I don't know," Lila whispered. "But I think we're still missing something." Back at Helen's house, the rose sat on the table. She lit a candle beside it, as if honoring the memory of someone she wasn't sure she hated or missed. No one had heard from Daniel since his reappearance and subsequent vanishing. Some believed he'd fled the country. Others swore he was dead, perhaps by his own hand, or someone else's. Lila never confirmed how far her plan went. What was certain, he was gone. But his presence lingered in every fractured relationship, every hesitant conversation, every rose. In a final act of quiet rebellion, Helen, Celeste, and Isabel agreed, without ever speaking to one another, that they wouldn't discard the roses. Instead, each woman placed hers in water, as if unwilling to sever the last tie to the man who bound them all together, for better or worse. And in her seaside cottage, Lila placed the photo in a drawer beside her bed. Not to forget, but to remind herself, the truth may have come out, but the story wasn't over. Because sometimes the biggest secrets weren't buried by one man. Sometimes they were shared. And that little girl in the photo? She was someone's daughter, too. Fade out. Roses bloom. The past lingers. And Mother's Day is never the same again.